For those who know Roman Britain, Agricola is the governor who marched into Scotland, won an amazing battle, and would have conquered the whole island if not for politics. Imperial politics. But there's a massive red flag when studying Agricola the man, and that's Agricola the text. That work is a story that comes to us from a single source, and that source is the biography cum eulogy of Agricola written by Agricola's son-in-law, the historian Tacitus, which was published a decade after that key battle and only after the death of Domitian in 96. Please note citations will be given on screen to the Agricola, and this is my own translation. So who was Agricola? Gnaeus Julius Agricola was born in the year 40 to a minor but prosperous family near Marseille, tied to the wider Julii more by trade than by any real descent. But Agricola was competent and, crucially, still well connected. His daughter and only child to survive to adulthood married the historian Tacitus, which means our best and occasionally only source on the Roman conquest of Britain was written by a man who adored Agricola, admired him, and was probably the nearest thing he had to an heir. But for those just saying bias in the comments, Tacitus is also one of the best historians of the Roman Empire and one of our best surviving sources for that entire century. So after a celebrated military career disproportionately served in Britain, Agricola served as governor of Britain for the unusually long term of 77 to 83. In addition, as I've mentioned in a previous video, he's clearly spent a substantial amount of time in Britain with his in-laws, his wife, and the British weather. So, who is the Agricola that Tacitus wants us to see? Tacitus gives us a dramatic 7-year campaign into northern England, Wales and Scotland, datable to pretty much 77 to 83, as told across chapters 22 to 38 of the Agricola. But to understand the Roman conquest of Britain, we have to understand how the ancients thought about geography. They certainly didn't think in terms of modern countries, or even smaller areas like modern counties. A combination of conquering and forming alliances with various tribes, who often had fuzzy boundaries, the Roman conquest would progress from one natural border to another. Typically in Britain, this was major rivers, which could form temporary or even permanent frontiers. By the time Agricola arrives as governor in 77, the Brigantes, basically modern northern England, was stable but not yet conquered, having previously been ruled by an ally queen called Cartimandua, whose life story definitely needs her own long-form video. The subsequent revolt of her people had been put down and the region was being integrated into the province. The legionary bases at York and Chester were being established to the modern day Humber and Mersey rivers that still to a certain extent separates the north from the Midlands. But Agricola uses this as a new frontier and a springboard, but he doesn't go north at first. Agricola's early campaigns focus on the region we would now call North Wales. Tacitus only really mentions him crushing a tribe called the Ordovices, but the archaeology fills in the gaps, forts, inscriptions and camps across modern-day Wales for the Ordovices, the Silures and the Decangli, which show Agricola consolidating the entire western flank. With Wales secure, Agricola then pushes north. We have temporary forts beyond the Ford-Clyde line, the modern-day central belt of Glasgow and Edinburgh, and the legionary fort at Inchel. The northern occupation, however, is short-lived. There's no sign of a permanent Roman presence in Scotland in the late 1st century. But then there's the famous Battle of Mond Graupius against the massed Caledonians, a battle site that has never been found. But to return to our main source, Tacitus's Agricola, it isn't really a biography. It's a delayed eulogy, and the first protest is about that delay. In the opening chapters, Tacitus complains that under Domitian, he couldn't even praise his father-in-law publicly because praise of another man, especially one so prominent and successful, would be seen as criticism of Domitian. Only after Domitian's death in 96 could Tacitus finally publish the work and set the record straight. Also, despite how much scholars of Roman Britain rely on it, historians need to remember that Tacitus's aim isn't to tell the story of the conquest of Britannia, or the book would be called Britannia. It's the Agricola. And the earliest chapters set that scene, not by recounting the previous century of conquests in Caesar, but show life under Domitian, specifically in Rome, at the imperial court, the Senate full of puppets, the atmosphere of suspicion. The Agricola is set up as a double eulogy, firstly for Agricola the man, who did not outlive Domitian, and partially for the honour of the Senate for collaborating with Domitian. And so the reader does not forget, Tacitus brings the Senate back in at the end where the shame of their silence becomes their shame of being forgotten by history, as Tacitus only names those who did speak up and did succeed under Domitian. So back to the Battle of Mons Gropius, where we have Tacitus's speech where an invented king of a far-off people gives a confected speech, including the famous line where he accuses the Romans of making a wasteland and calling it peace. And this is where Calgacus is nothing like the other patriotic heroes of the previous 100 years. Boudicca, Vercingetorix, and Arminius. Those were real leaders with real grievances. Tacitus himself gives them speeches where they refer to broken specific promises, tax issues, corrupt governors. And here's the thing about Calgacus's big speech. It's not anti-empire, because Tacitus is perfectly fine with empire. He's fine with Rome conquering Britain, subjugating the enslaved, the poor, even the provincials, but not senators. That just wasn't cricket, as a later empire might have put it. This speech is classic Tacitus, using a barbarian speech to criticise the empire with the things that a Roman senator wasn't allowed to say. And so after the battle, Agricola didn't conquer Scotland. He wasn't defeated. He won the battle. As Tacitus tells it, Agricola was prevented from the full conquest, and then Agricola was promptly withdrawn as governor. Was the war too expensive? Was he too great a threat to Domitian? Was Domitian jealous of his success? Or was 7 years just a phenomenally long time to be governor of a key province when the typical term was much closer to 3 years? Agricola died in 93, quietly at home, almost certainly in Rome, where he'd been living for another decade without being appointed to another political office. Tacitus hints that Agricola's death was suspiciously convenient. He even suggests that if Agricola had outlived Domitian, he might have been the man the Senate had chosen. And honestly, it doesn't take a genius or even an average man to be a better prospect than Nerva. To Tacitus, Agricola wasn't just a governor. He was the ghost of a better Rome, the emperor that Rome could have had. Nevertheless, Agricola stabilised northern Britain, built infrastructure, and pushed further north than most governors had ever dared. And on a personal level, he's responsible for establishing a lot of the Roman sites that we still know today in northern England, particularly Chester and York. And also, the Agricola teaches us that sometimes living in scary times gives us more incentive to be extraordinary. Hope you enjoyed the first long-form video with my face in it. Like and subscribe for more Roman and British history facts every week, and especially like and comment if you liked this video for more long-form videos.